Now, the last criticism from miracles is that of Maurice Wiles. Now, Wiles was a 20th century theologian and was also the Professor of Divinity at Oxford. So quite a noted person. Now, what Wiles says is, firstly, as a criticism of Hume, he rejected the idea that miracles were logically incoherent. He thought that there was nothing illogical about God's intervention in the world. Now, at this point, I should note that with Hume's inductive argument, the other element of what Hume was saying was that, by definition, if a miracle is a violation of the law of nature, if a miracle takes place, then therefore it must be the law of nature. Therefore, by definition, we could argue that miracles cannot occur, because when one does occur, we have to revise the natural law. Well, it was one of those issues that he actually said, is that the natural laws of science, he believed, aren't fixed in the way that Hume thought they were. He points out to the fact that we're constantly revising these natural laws, constantly changing them, and certainly quantum physics would support the idea that they're not fixed and rigid in the way that Hume suggests, that actually different things actually occur, and sometimes we can't explain them. Now, he does agree with many of Hume's subsidiary arguments about the criticisms, but what characterises Wiles is this central belief that we experience God through a solitary intervention, namely the intervention of creation, as opposed to constant intervention. Now, we've got two types of criticism from Wiles. The first is theological and the second is moral. Now, with the theological criticism, what Wiles says is that there's nothing to be gained theologically from believing in a God that intervenes. And he says that when prayer is based around the idea of petitionary prayer, trying to get something back, it's rather unhelpful. Rather, prayer should just be simply a way of communication. And he pointed to the example from the New Testament, whereas what he believes is that the value is in Jesus' teaching, not in the miracles in which he performs. We could see the role that miracles play in the New Testament. Effectively, Jesus says something, a miracle occurs, therefore we should believe in what he said is true. That's where he gets his authority from. But Wiles says that whether the miracles took place or not is insignificant. And in fact, Jesus himself refused point blank to perform miracles when people asked him to perform miracles to prove he was who he said he was. It's not the point, according to Wiles. The second, and perhaps the most valid criticism from Wiles, is similar to something that we looked at with A.S., and the criticism of John Stuart Mill, and namely it's a moral problem, linked to the problem of evil. Wiles says that if we believe that God intervenes in nature, then effectively he's an arbitrary God. The intervention of God also implies the non-action, or the inaction, and he must choose who to save and who not to save, when to intervene and when not to intervene. He says it's much less problematic to believe that God never intervenes, despite, obviously, again, the problems with free will. So let's draw upon our nature of evil here, generally criticise all of God's intervention. If God intervenes, is this limiting our freedom, our free will? If he intervenes to prove that he is real, then that will be influencing our decision. But the main thing is what he says is that the arbitrary God becomes a God unworthy of worship, a God who allows Hiroshima, who allows the Holocaust, yet, in the case of the Toronto Blessing, puts gold in someone's teeth, or performs some minor healing miracle. Why does God do some things, not other things? It seems to be arbitrary and unfair. Better the idea of a singular act of creation. And that's criticism from Wiles.